seen ever. And unfortunately, I have to take full responsibility because I wrote it. And now I have to talk about it. But essentially, the idea of Hindu relevance, it's a bit of a silly title in one sense because, of course, it's relevant. There's up to 1 billion people practice it. And it's the oldest known religious tradition in the world, philosophical tradition, civilization. And no one has successfully defined the term Hindu, and I'm not going to try and do it this evening either. So it's a very big topic, and I've mentioned that it's theological and philosophical and religious and spiritual. It's a thing today, asking younger people particularly, are you a member of religion? I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And it's just an ill-defined thing what spiritual is. But this is a discussion that's been going on in India for millennia. So what's the relevance? The difficulty with it is the subject area is ill-defined. What is Hindu? What is Hinduism? Hinduism doesn't exist. There's no such thing. It's an invention of the 19th century. It was a good census item for the British to try and tie people down a little bit. But it doesn't make any sense in an Indian context. The word Hindu itself, as we know, is not an Indian word, but has been used for an awfully long time in India, many, many hundreds of years. And certainly in the 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century, Indians started to identify themselves as Hindus for the first time. In the census of Bengal at the turn of the last century, people didn't identify themselves as Hindus. They identified themselves as Shaktas, as Vaishnavas, as Shaivas, as Sanatana Dharmis, as Vaidika Dharmis, as all kinds of identities. And that's actually how people identified. Then in the 30 years later, most of them put down Hindu. So there was a big shift in the 20th century for all kinds of reasons we won't get into. So now Hindu has become a thing, but it's 100 years old. That's self-identification. Previously, a Hindu would identify themselves as Hindu to someone who wasn't Hindu. So they would understand that they see us as Hindu, so they would say, I'm a Hindu. And we can see that in medieval Indian texts. That's the only instance where we see the word Hindu is when Hindus are identifying themselves to others, not self-identifying. So that's the beginning. I just make it difficult subject to talk about. It is interesting, though, that we are still talking about Hinduism millennia after it was first conceived. So it has lasted an awfully long time. How has it remained? How has it sustained itself? So there is a relevance. It's just kind of obvious because 1 billion people say so and have said so for some, not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years. And in all sociological calculations, when a community or a culture or a civilization becomes economically prosperous, the first thing they do is they ditch religion. Religious observance goes down. A lot of it is because there's not much to pray for anymore. You have the BMW, you got your exam results, your children are well educated, you're not in poverty, so why go to the temple, church, synagogue, and mosque? So that's the thinking. Interestingly, in the last 35 years, India has developed economically to a very high level internationally. So it's not a developing country anymore in those standards. We don't even use the term in terms of India anymore. But religion hasn't diminished, it's increased. It's completely bucked the trend. It doesn't make any sense in any observational understanding. But could it be that the observational understanding is looking at things from a certain religious perspective, not taking into account global religious understanding? So you're looking at a completely different understanding of religion, of culture, of spirituality, and how they're linked to a civilizational model. Hinduism isn't simply a culture, it's actually a civilization. It's so multifaceted that you can't encapsulate it in one space. So that's what I want to really talk about this evening. I want to talk about how how this happened, and by discussing it, we'll begin to understand the relevance of Hinduism in a modern context. But what I also want to do is open it up for discussion, because it's not so much questions, but really discussion. What are your issues with this? You've come here for a reason. You're attracted by the terrible abstract I sent out. But what are the issues that you would like to discuss? And let's open it up, because I find that makes it live and kind of real. You're not just getting an academic lecture. But what are your issues with regard to relevance? I mean, how relevant is Hinduism to what you think are the biggest issues on the planet today? And we'll see if that's feasible. And that's how we can understand it. So the first thing, I thought we go to first principles. We just remind ourselves of what are the oldest understandings of Hindu thought, shall we say, that have trickled down over the last millennia. And they've trickled down in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and some other traditions as well. So the first thing to discuss is the Rig Veda, the oldest book of philosophy known to man. And there are certain ideas. There's one particular idea called Rita. Hands up all of those who understand Rita, R-T-A with a little dot under it. Raj knows Rita. Kirtida knows Rita. No, Rita. So Rita is a very important word that is not discussed these days and not studied anywhere, but it's the word from which Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, Karma in terms of action-reaction, the idea of reincarnation, Varnashram, Ahimsa, Seva, Yajna, other ideas that you will have heard of, they all trickle down from the idea of Rita. The idea of Rita is a philosophical concept. It's very simple. It's completely observational. Seers or sages or rishis or munis just observed that there is cosmic order. It's just an assumption that they make, just observationally. There's cosmic order. Things are highly organized. And we see that just by observing the world around us. Just the fact that the sun most definitely is going to rise in the east. Good, right, so we're all agreed. How do we know that? We saw it happen yesterday and the day before, and they've been talking, we can read literature going back to Roman times, and it's attested that that happens every day. Now, I can prophesize that. It is actually a prophecy because it hasn't happened yet, but it's a very reasonable prophecy. Highly organized. Everything about the cycles of nature, the cycles of our own lives. When you get to our age, Ranjit, you just look back at these cycles and you see, yeah, in my 20s I thought, I'm going to be different. And now I'm in my 60s, and no, I'm no different than anybody. I'm going through exactly the same cycles, and this finger here is starting to get a bit stiff, and all that stuff. These are just the cycles of life, highly organized. We can militate against it, we can rebel, we can do whatever we like, but our hair is going to get grey and our face is going to get wrinkly. Done. So it's a simple observation, but from that observation comes a lot of other thinking that is very relevant in an Indian context. If that's the case, then who are we in this context? What is our role to play? We're born into something that's highly organized. Does that mean that I have a part in the organization? That gives rise to the concept of dharma. What's the right thing to do? And in any case, what we're going to do is seva. It's going to be service, because I'm a very small part of this machine, this very, very big machine. I'm a very small cog. But if I don't do my cog thing, if I don't find out what that is, I'm not contributing to the welfare of all. In fact, I'm detracting. If I don't do the right thing, or if I just ignore it, either way, I'm not playing the game. I'm not part of the scene. So what's my service to do? So dharma, the root word in Sanskrit is drit, which means to sustain. what do I do to sustain the whole cosmos around me? That's all about others, it's not about myself at all. That's the root of Dharma, is the beginning process is seva. It's something that we do. So I'm putting out these words as little markers because they're going to become important as we go on. So this is about relationship of obligation. I have obligation to others. I have obligation to society I live in, to my family, to the nation I live in, to the world as a whole, to the cosmos itself. And as I become more conscious, I become more aware of these things. When we're very young, we're only conscious of our parents and that little community. When we go to school, we become more conscious of others around us. Then we become conscious of the nation in which we live. There's a capital city. And then there's people up north who don't like the capital city, and we become conscious of all that stuff. So that's about the relationship of obligation. There's things that I should do, I really have to do. That's the beginning of that thinking. Interestingly, this is theistic or non-theistic. It doesn't matter. This isn't about God. This is just about, if you're born here, get with the program. That's the thinking. So the beginning is, I am a servant. It's very much not, I am the master. You're not the master of all you survey. You're not the master of any other living being. You're not the master of the environment. You're always the servant. That's always the starting point. That's a very different way of thinking than Greek and Abrahamic thinking. So that's important for us to recognize, and this is part of the relevance of Hinduism, I would say. Your assumption, your philosophical starting point is very different, and it has real life consequences with regard to the environment and relationships, etc.
What is Abraham, you said just now?
Abrahamic includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So the thinking of that is based on the book of Genesis in the Bible, and that starting point is that we are given all this by God, so we are the masters. So that's a philosophical assumption. Now, in the 18th century, in Europe, people started to question this and become, the Enlightenment period it was called, become more philosophical. They divorced philosophy from religion, two different things. And they started to question all kinds of things very openly, think independently, but interestingly, they didn't question this. And that's just an interesting fact. And there are certain other things that they didn't question. They didn't have alternative understandings. And why would they, in one sense? So if we look at that, if we are the master of all we survey, and then another word we should use is ritu. Ritu is a word that falls out of rita. Ritu means RTU?
Season.
Season. It also means cycle. That everything in this organized cosmos works in cycles. So it comes around and comes around and comes around and comes around. The Jewish way of thinking is that it's a linear progression. So Jewish, Christian, Islamic thinking is about linear progression. You're getting towards perfection, you're getting towards the kingdom of God. We're all going in the right direction. It's progressive. Now that's a very different way of thinking from Indian thinking, Chinese thinking, Celtic thinking, Scandinavian thinking, Germanic thinking. So many other civilizations or cultures thought in terms of cycles. But this linear progression thing comes out of a religious way of thinking, a religious aspiration, which is fine. But it is also uncritically become our philosophical assumption in Western thought. So in science, we're progressively getting better. We're going to conquer disease. We're going to conquer death. We're going to conquer old age. It's a linear progression that is always getting better. It's not necessary. We don't think in cyclical terms. So these ways of thinking have real life consequences. Does that make any sense, that things are always getting better? Because factually they're not. Is the politics of the planet at the moment better than it was 30 years ago? or 100 years ago. In fact, 100 years ago, it was practically exactly the same. The politics of popularism, of nationalism, of non-globalism, not reaching out but creating barriers. Tariffs were a particular favourite of the Germans during that period. That didn't end well. So we see these cycles repeating themselves. It's not that things are getting better, things are working in cycles. They could be progressively getting better, but in cycles. So anyway, these are just things to be taken into account. This is about these philosophical ideas leading to everything that I've said are about relationships of obligation. Then I'd mention another word that appears in the Rig Veda, Atman, the self. Now in Western philosophy, the idea of the self isn't very important. In Eastern philosophy, it is primarily important. Unless you understand yourself, you have no idea who you are in relation to anything else. As we've discussed with Rita, relationships are very important. Who am I in relation to the greater whole? I can't answer that question unless I can ask the question, who am I? And if I ask any of you, who are you, and you can't answer the question, well, you're totally ignorant. Where do you start having a relationship? So this idea becomes very important. So this is discussed over and over in the Upanishads, which are going on from the Vedas, in the Puranas, in the Itihasas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, continue to be discussed. But the idea of Atman being the body, Deha, the mind, Manas, the intelligence, Buddhi, and the Atma, the idea of Brahman, the idea of the spiritual self. So these are different manifestations of the self. They're all recognized in the Rig Veda, but interestingly the Upanishads, following on from that, really only focus on the spiritual self because that's the most enduring part of the self. The rest of it is going to crumble. So 70 years, 80 years in the body, good innings. The mind changes every 5 seconds. You know, I feel good, I feel terrible. And the intellect is changing all the time. Every book we read, every film we see, every lecture we listen to, we change our way of thinking. So what's the consistent part? What's the part that lasts and goes on and on and on? So I remember when I was 7. Please, welcome. Hands up all of you who can remember being 7. Hands up all of you who are in a 7-year-old body at the moment. Yeah, you're convincing no one. We've left that behind. That body is completely gone. Every single cell has been replaced. We have reincarnated. We have changed our body. And we do that, they say, every 7 years. So we've reincarnated regularly. So who's remembering? That becomes the primary question. Who is this person remembering? This is the consistent part. So how to put energy into the consistent part. And then if we look at that philosophically, they say, well, this part being non-material is not bound by the material. Now, why do I say it's non-material? Because anything that's material, we observe has a beginning and an end. Can anyone think of something about themselves that's not material, that doesn't have a beginning or an end? Has anyone got any experience of something that doesn't have a beginning or an end? Hands up everyone who wants to be happy. Just put your hand up if you want to be happy. Just put your hand up, don't think about it, put your hand up. If you want to be happy, put your hand up. Okay. Hands up everyone who wants to suffer and die. We'll arrange it today. So everyone puts their hands up for being happy, no one puts their hands up for suffering and dying. So you want to be happy, but you don't want it to end. You want a happiness without end. That is eternal happiness. Yet we have no experience of eternality. Where does that desire come from? It's a real desire. We don't want our happiness to end. The idea is right there, and somehow we understand it, but we can't think of anything. because everything we think of is material. But this is part of us. This desire is our expression. Maybe it's the most important desire in our existence. I can arrange happiness that has an end. We can go out and have a drinking session together. That'll end badly. Or we can take drugs, we can watch, box sets, listen to Beethoven. We can do all kinds of things, but there's a beginning and an end. 15 rounds of the Ninth Symphony will bore us to tears after a while. It wears down. What is a happiness without end? Or maybe not even without end, but ever increasing. That's attractive, isn't it? Why is that attractive if we have no experience of it? This is the thinking of Indian philosophers. So they're looking at this part of us that is non-material. It doesn't have an end, it's eternal by nature. Now in mathematics we have the sign for infinity. So it's mathematically a thing. Again, we don't understand it because we're trying to conceive it with a material brain. But inside in ourselves there's something else. So that's what they're saying. This part of us is non-material. Therefore, this part of us is not a man or a woman. It's not Irish or Indian or British. It's not big or small. These are all material designations, but they're considered not to be who we are, not to be taken very seriously. But that kind of thinking leads us to develop a greater concern for others if we're already thinking about Dharma and Seva. We're already thinking about others, how to sustain others. So that's a relationship of concern. You're concerned about people, that they don't take these designations seriously. Certainly not seriously enough to beat each other up over or kill each other. They say, I don't like you just because you're English. I mean, I can list reasons why that would be the case, but because I'm Irish. Only if I identify like that does it become relevant. Can I let the identity go and let go all that nonsense? The whole issues of men and women and our identity, and they become hard stances. How reasonable is that? Certainly if you have this kind of vision. So it's a completely different way of seeing the world, where these designations don't mean anything. And when you hear someone stand up and make a big speech, hammering these designations into our mind that these are the most important things, then you just can't take it seriously. And you begin to realize that actually that speech is quite insidious. How insidious it is. When they appeal to our sexual identity, our national identity, our identity in any context that's material, these texts are saying, well, this isn't us, so this isn't something to get involved with. And if you get involved with it, you create barriers and discord. So these are relationships of concern. You become concerned about other people. You become concerned that people don't propagate these ideas. And then finally the idea of Bhagavan. Everyone knows what Bhagavan means? Yes? Bhagavan means the supreme. So it's the personal idea of God. Now, the Hindus don't talk about this an awful lot because since Vivekananda we're quite convinced that the way to express God to a Western audience is through the idea of Brahman, once you say oneness, everyone understands what you're talking about. And then you just cut through everything. But in actual fact, the idea of Bhagavan is more relatable to, for many Westerners, but it's more relatable to because of the traditions that developed with the idea of a personal God. And they're the ideas of bhakti, of love. Now, when we talk about happiness, the word that expresses that most is love. Interestingly, what's the vocabulary of love? You go to someone and you open up the little box and you get on your knee and you say, I will love you forever, eternity, always. I will never leave you. These are absolute terms to do with eternity. It's totally unconsciously This is how we express our desire for happiness. It's completely ridiculous because scientifically you could say, I will love you for 30, 40 years. Doesn't do it, does it? Doesn't just make that impact because it's not what we're looking for. We're looking for eternal happiness. And we have a vocabulary for it in every single language in the world. No woman is going to do with anything less than eternity. It's intriguing how simple this is, in one sense, how relatable it is. And when I ask these questions, who wants to be happy, who wants to suffer, in any audiences, so if it's Western, if it's Chinese, I've done it to Indian audiences, American audiences, Dutch audiences, English audiences, it's exactly the same answers every time. Because it's just so simple, you're getting down to brass tacks. Our assumption is that we can be happy eternally. Yet we can't find the outlets. So we become more and more frustrated as we go on in life. We're not finding that the basis for eternal happiness because everything we're looking at has a beginning and an end. So these texts are saying, no, you can find these relationships. And if you develop your relationship, if you can conceive of a supreme behind all this, behind Rita, if this is highly organized, how was it organized? What intelligence organized it? And if that intelligence source is a person, then how do you develop a relationship with that person? And all the discourse about that person is about love, loving relationships. So the offering of love. So where is the source of everything? This person. What is the source of love? Well, it's going to be this person. So if I want to learn how to love, have a relationship there. Now the literature on this in Indian culture is vast. The whole fields of poetry, of Sanskrit expression and metaphor has developed just based on this idea. And this idea is very relevant because we're looking for a relationship of love that doesn't end. So where do you look for it? You look for it with a person that doesn't end. And by developing a relationship with the person behind everything, you develop your relationship with everything connected to that person, which is everything. Therefore, your relationship with other people, other cultures, men, women, dogs, elephants, giraffes, the whole environment becomes one that is based on love. Your capacity to love, to give to others, to be kind to others, to be affectionate, to be compassionate, to be tolerant. It leads to a natural humility. Maybe one of the most attractive qualities anyone can possess, yet very difficult to talk about. As soon as I tell Ranjitji that he's humble, he goes, oh, I'm humble, and then he's not. So it's such a subtle quality. Compassion is such a subtle quality. We don't get to talk about it very much, but it's very interesting how we can veer from it, how we can even say that it's not worthy, it's not strong enough. And politically, this has been said over and over again. It's being said this week, in fact. It was being said by world leaders that this is weak, this is wrong. Yet these texts are saying, no, this is the essence of every relationship. This is the only way things are going to actually work. And it's not sectarian. It's for anyone. If we slap the label Hindu on it, we just make it more difficult for people to access it. How Hindu is it? Because the texts themselves don't self-identify as being Hindu. These are just philosophers getting together, thinking, theologians, all kinds of people, material scientists, getting together and sitting in a room and having Vada. And a Vada is a collection of people who come to talk about Sat, what is real. So they're going to sit down and say, okay, what's your understanding of suffering? What's your understanding of God? And have a discussion about it. And then develop, from their own experience, from their own practice, and share those ideas. This is how all this has developed. And then people talk about inspiration. So in terms of some of the things that were in the very badly written abstract, one word mentioned was immigration. How does Hinduism relate to immigration? And if you look at the history of India, and this is all the different cultures and different denominations that have developed, they've all been interacting for thousands of years. People traveling up and down. You have the Ramayana, you go from Ayodhya down to Sri Lanka. No one bats an eyelid. People down in Chennai are going on pilgrimage to Badrik Ashram in the Himalayas. These are natural pathways. These are in the literature for hundreds and hundreds of years. These are normal journeys. But they're passing through countries where people speak a completely different language. And their expression of religion, be it Hinduism or whatever, is completely different. I remember going in Chennai actually to the Parthasarathi temple, a temple built in the 6th century. And every evening they have a procession comes out of the temple, and I arrived just as the procession came out. 100 priests coming out chanting, I mean very, proper procession, and bringing a murti on a palanquin. And I'm a Vaishnav, they're Vaishnavas. I didn't recognize the murti, I didn't recognize the chants, I didn't know what they were talking about. Supposedly the same, not only the same religion, but the same denomination of the same religion. No idea what's going on. But still, there's no issue. No one said, oh, there's a white guy, get rid of him. I was just there, a priest came over, threw water on my head as a blessing, because I was there. So immigration has been happening for centuries. And then there's the other immigrants. There's the Persians, the Greeks, the Scythians, the Huns, the Kushans, the Seleucids, and then the Mughals, the Turks, the Iranians, the British, the Dutch, the French, the Danish even the Danish had a go. They all came, and somehow it wasn't an issue. Here in England, we had Celts. We don't know who was here before the Celts, but there were people here before the Celts. We know that because in Irish tradition, they talk about those people as the Tuatha De Danann. They actually have a name. They talk about the negotiations they had with them to come and stay. Same in England. Then you had the Romans. Who else did you have? The Vikings, they came later, but yes, they came. The Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, the Frisians, then the Vikings, the Normans, and then the Irish. No. And then, of course, with Empire, you had an influx of Indians and people from the subcontinent, from China, from Africa, from all the places associated with Empire. And then people start complaining about all this. You make these relationships with people all over the place, and people start complaining. Let me read you something, let's see if it makes any sense. The uneducated, I confess, were seldom pleased in any country with the coming in of foreigners among them, which proceeds first from their ignorance, that at the beginning they were foreigners themselves. Secondly, from their grudging at more persons sharing the same trades or business with them, which they call taking the bread out of their mouths. And thirdly, from their being deluded in this way of thinking by the politics of those who want any change in the government. So he goes on to say that wise people will prevent the last. We'll see about that with reform and etc. And deal with the first. But the true cause is the second one, taking the bread out of their mouths. People will be talked into this by that argument. This was written in 1714 here in England. Same argument, same analysis. It's just repeating this, grinding the same thing. If you want to rile up the people, you just come out with, they're taking the bread out of your mouths. And everyone's doing the same thing. Have we learned anything? This is cyclical. If we just go back a few hundred years, you'll see it in every decade practically. So this is just being reasonable about this. But it's also, in Indian culture, the guest is received as if they were God. When does that stop? At what point does that stop in terms of immigration? And in another sense, are we not all immigrants, all looking to get into the spiritual realm by any manner or means? You know, we're going to get in, if we can get in by boats, we'll try that. We'll stow away somewhere rather than have to practice religious life. You know, if you can stow away on the coattails of someone else's spirituality, let's give that a go. But are we not all aiming towards immigration? Is that not what the whole game is for people who are spiritually inclined? So where is this thinking coming from? So this John Toland, who wrote this in 1714, he's of the opinion that this is very ignorant thinking. And from an Indian point of view, it would be exactly the same. The approach we have to immigration of not welcoming the stranger is actually ignorant thinking. If people come just to take advantage, then you deal with that like you do in any social system. If someone wants to take advantage and not make a contribution, just live off your welfare system, well then you balance the welfare system against them. That's common sense. But at what stage does it become the political basis of extremism? The kind of thing we saw when the Southport killings happened, and then people just attacked Muslims and Sikhs and immigration centres. They were attacking people just because they were people, just because they were different. How ignorant can you get? This isn't just a Hindu thing. But Hinduism addresses this very clearly. Every person has to be respected because they're spiritual beings. Every dog has to be respected. What to speak of someone of a different caste or religion or gender? That just doesn't bear thinking about, that we would be so small-minded. So that's the relevance of this thought, the idea in the Gita of samadarshanaha, equal vision. That when you see any living being, you give equal respect. I remember coming out of the same temple on another day in Chennai. I'm stuck in Chennai for this talk. I remember there was tons of people coming out of the temple, and of course you're looking for your shoes. And there's hundreds of pairs of shoes. So your head is down, and I found my shoes, and I was getting into them, and I bumped into someone, and I turned around, and of course you go, namaste. And it was a cow. And I thought, totally appropriate to offer that respect to that person who was also in the temple, also on a pilgrimage of worship of some kind, trying to get some prasad from someone. But, you know, someone worthy of respect. This is another person sharing the planet and doing their thing, and I'm just here doing my thing. And that's the idea of samadarshana. So it's a relationship of concern for others. And the idea of Bhagavan and Bhakti is relationships of love. So our relationships at the lowest level should be of obligation. We do it because we have to do it. This is the right thing to do. To do something out of concern, it's more affectionate, it's more thoughtful. It's not about me doing the thing I have to do. I'm actually doing it for the other person because they need it. And then the relationship of love is absolutely not about us at all. It really is about others. It's where your satisfaction comes from being able to express whatever little love we have in our heart, whatever little selfless happiness we have, little spark of understanding we have of that eternal happiness. We actually give it away. And by giving it away, you don't lose anything. In fact, it increases. And that's a risk that we have to take. Spirituality is actually a risk. It's a difficult move to make. So this is the idea of just three ideas and how they're relevant. I'll also just give you another idea economically, something that we're doing in the centre. We've experimented with it for nearly 20 years. But we're actually working with a company in India now, a very high-level company, on dharmic investments. So how do you invest dharmically? How do you invest your money so that they accord with your principles? So that you're not investing in things that you don't want to invest in. So normally you give your money to an asset manager and he says, I'll give you a return of 7%. And you go, oh, 7%, that's good. Let's go with that. But what if you go and of course that person invests in X, Y, and Z, but they're investing in tobacco, pornography, arms and ammunition, all kinds of stuff, and you're feeding all those things by your investment. Maybe that's not something you want to do. So then, how do you invest dharmically? How do you screen the companies so that they're not doing this, this, and this? Then how are they treating their employees? What are their environmental policies? So this is all eminently feasible.
Is that same as ethical investment?
It's very like ethical investment, except it's what you might call faith investment. So, and now interestingly, if you start dharmic investment, and you have Sharia investment, and you have Christians and Jews investing according to their principles, this is only something that started happening in the last 35 years, that people have become aware of this. But if those people start investing together, that's a tremendous amount of financial power. And that's more powerful than anything the UN can do. Because you have tremendous assets. Religions own 7% of the planet outright. And the religious investments control already 8% of the global markets. But if you add religious adherents, if they were given guidance by their religion, then that's 35% of the markets. That's huge. That's game-changing. That means you could say, we're taking all our money out of fossil fuels, and that would immediately, you would see people running around coming up with very credible alternatives, because they have to. You can bring around real change on the planet if to do something like this. So understanding how to invest from any faith point of view, including Hinduism, is extremely important. And the UN has admitted that that's the case and has started to talk to religions, and I've been involved in some of those talks in New York about how to do this. Because the UN realizes with all the COPs and all the different climate change things, nothing's changing. Because politicians actually can't change unless they're allowed to do so by their asset managers, the finance people. They're the people who actually make the decisions at this level. So the UN is looking and asking religions, can you help? And the UN has been religiously non-religious. It decided not to have anything to do with religion, so this is a huge change. Now they have a unit in their environmental program to bring religions together to talk about these things. So that's dynamically relevant. And then, in terms of time, yeah, we're going on and on. The environment as well. So much to say about the environment, but let's open it up for this famous discussion I talked about that we didn't have. So there are some thoughts as the basis of discussion. What are your issues, needs, or concerns, and how can we not address them this evening? Ranjit.
Just a second. Just anybody who wants to ask a question, please grab this from me so we can capture the audio, at least.
Do I just hold it in my hand? Shaunaka ji, what a pleasure to listen to you again. We missed you and other lecturers immensely. And we forgot how to ask questions even. Now we are relearning. So what you talked about was, one was Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family. So obviously the family members can go wherever they fancy. There can't be any restrictions. And the second thing which you talked about was Atithi Devo Bhava. The guest is Devta. He's God himself has come, arrived in your house, and he's got to be welcomed. Now, a couple of things came to my mind. The birds, they can fly anywhere, wherever the weather is nice, where they can increase their population. Don't need any visa. Earthworm, whales, fish can fancy, wherever they fancy. No visa, no boundaries. Now, there's a great debate going on at the moment about assisted dying. I asked my neighbor the other day, where are you going? Oh, I'm taking my dog to the vet to put him down. In this country, animals can be put down, but not human beings. There's a huge debate going on in the parliament. God knows whether that bill will pass or not pass. Now, you said about Hindu. Whenever somebody asks us, who are you? We never say Hindu, we say Indian. And the reason is because an Indian can be Hindu, Muslim, Christian, anybody. So the religion comes into it. So we never say Hindu. So
Remember when you said you forgot to ask a question? You were right.
I know. Thank you.
But thanks. It's interesting. The whole world is one family. I hear that repeated so often. We do remember that families can be quite dysfunctional, right? The whole world is a family, but it's really dysfunctional. That's why I mentioned these principles, because this is the basis of it. To recognize the world as interconnected is thinking of Rita. Cosmic order means everything is interconnected. Everything is interdependent. People have to cooperate just to function. So, do we do that in families? Often not. People complain bitterly about having to go to Christmas to be with their family. In Ireland, I never heard that, but it's become a thing. I hear it a lot here for some reason. And it's sad to hear that families are so dysfunctional that we can't bear to be with each other. That's really sad. And that's why the idea of dharma, you do it out of obligation, or you do it out of concern, or you do it out of love. But anyway, you do it. We are part of the same family, so therefore we have to learn how to be the best part of that family we can be. Either from just the baseline of duty, or concern for others, or actual love. That concern is all-encompassing. And when people meet us, they just feel relaxed. They feel taken care of. Anyway, that's just a little comment based on that. Has anyone else got any thoughts or questions? Or yes, oh, look at that. Famous surgeon.
One question. Thank you very much for your talk. It was always insightful, and thank you for the organizers to bring it back, the talk series back in Leicester. So my question is on your topic, the title. So you used the word Hindu and not Hinduism, and you used the word culture. Now we can see that we could have used Hindu religion, or Hindu philosophy, or Hindu tradition. Or nowadays you can see the rise of political Hinduism so much. So do you think that this sort of change, or is this all a cycle, Ritu, and this political Hinduism which you see nowadays, very similar to a lot of Abrahamic religions, this is something which a stage which would pass, and we'll get what is known as or what we feel is the real Hindu culture back?
Very interesting question. Hinduism, interestingly, has always gone forward. Every culture it comes in contact with, it sucks out what it thinks is good and leaves the rest. It's just always been developing, expanding, progressing. So it's very innovative. It's interesting, like as I said at the start, the development of Indian society, its urbanization, which has been vast in the last 35 years, just incredible pace. It's social development, it's technological development. Everyone is on WhatsApp. That means everyone has a smartphone. The rickshaw wala, the guys who cycle on the rickshaw, not even the guys who drive it. So everyone's connected. So even with all that, Hinduism has adapted. So now you do online pujas. It's not that Hinduism disappeared with technology. It embraced it completely. There's nothing you can't do practically in a ritual sense that you can't do online in your bed. On your computer, just sitting there doing a puja. Well, you'd have to get up and take a bath, put on a dhoti, go down to the temple. Now you can just sit in your bed and do it. Hinduism is exceedingly innovative, always has. So there's no going back. It's constantly changing. when we talk about political Hinduism, it's a specific development that happened in the 1920s. It's nationalism, which is a German idea from the 18th century, Erich Herder and his friends. And in the 18th century, it wasn't considered a very good idea by most people. Jonathan Swift, the author, said that the idea of patriotism that arises out of nationalism is, he thought it was the worst idea in the world, kind of for imbeciles. But then, just over 100 years later, Lloyd George in England in World War I is saying that patriotism is the pinnacle of sacrifice. So the thinking had changed so much. And that's the thinking that India started to engage with to develop its nationalism. So it's very interesting to see where that goes. It's an experiment. Is nationalism working for the world? It certainly didn't work for Germany. Germany is still recovering from its really car crash with nationalism. So it's a very young idea. It may not be working, but so many people are taking with it and experimenting with it. India's experimenting with it. But the idea of Hindu and national is kind of an oxymoron. It kind of doesn't make sense. If we just talked about Atma, and so we're not this physical corporal body, we only inhabit this body as a vehicle for a certain length of time. So to take it very seriously wouldn't be very serious. Yet nationalism requires you to take it absolutely seriously as your primary identity. So it doesn't make sense. If we take it seriously as our primary identity, we begin to debar ourselves from the capacity to love others. If we look back to the idea of bhakti, if everyone is connected with God, therefore it's our obligation to love the Supreme. We should love everyone connected with the Supreme. We're barring ourselves from doing that. So our capacity to love God or love nature or love the world has been diminished by that thinking, if we take that seriously. And that's the idea of relationships of love. And even like with the Atma idea, relationships of concern. You can't have those relationships if you've just shut down, if you've blinkered yourself to say that this is the world. That, to be Irish is the most important thing. Now, of course, I know that that's a fact. But if I insist on that, and I insist that you treat me in a certain way because of that, that's moronic. I mean, you would consider it moronic because you're not Irish, obviously. But Ireland is just, 5 million people? Why would you take it seriously? So why would you become so nationalistic? Yet I was brought up on nationalism as a kid. I was brought up during the 50th anniversary of the Irish War of Independence. I was 5 years old. So I was just getting this in my ear all the time. Everyone I met, every older person, I fought and died for Ireland. Everyone's a rabid nationalist. So it's difficult to get rid of once it's inculcated that is your identity. But if you think about it, according to these simple ways of thinking, it doesn't make any sense. Yet, it is the politics of the age. And it's leading to all the conflict that we're seeing. We're taking it seriously. I'm Ukrainian, I'm Russian, I'm Palestinian, I'm Jewish. Creates the conflict, enables it. Why would you get involved, you would say? But it's very difficult not to get involved because the whole of our social policy, our political theory is based on certain assumptions. And these assumptions are based on bodily identification. This is saying that there are other ways of identifying that are much more comprehensive and much more enabling for us to be concerned about others, concerned about the planet, and actually achieve relationships of love. So that's why Hinduism is relevant in global thinking. Unless we include it in global thinking, our thinking is going to remain paralyzed, retarded. And that's what these ways of thinking are there for It's just that they haven't been studied before, they haven't been explored before, they haven't been brought into they haven't been brought to the level of executive decision making. And this I suggest is what globalization is actually about, is sharing ways of thinking in this idea of Vada, people coming together in a non-sectarian, non-political way just to talk about what is real. And share their ideas, no idea is a bad idea, let's see it for what it is. But if we want a society where we actually end up with happiness based on ever-increasing love, nationalism might not be the best idea. Whether it be Hindu nationalism, Christian nationalism. All I know is it's important to make America great again.
So just to follow on from the question and what you've just said, Shaunaka, at times like Pahalgam, we see a rise in talks about Hindutva. Where does that sit within the Hindu philosophy and culture, this concept of Hindutva? Because I do not understand it.
Well, I mean, it's eminently studyable. It's the kind of thing in our centre we want to study, because it's a phenomenon now, and you know, people who follow Hindutva say that we are Hindu. This is the only way you can really define Hindu. So it's another form of Hinduism. So it's just not one that I personally relate to. So because it's linked to the nation. Now I had a talk with a RSS member, and we were in discussion. He said, look, our whole project is about the Indianization of everything in India. You know, be it the economic forums, the education system, the political process. And he said, you know, how can your centre help with that? And I said, well, our centre is not sectarian or political, so we can't help with that. We can help with all kinds of other discourses, but we can't help with that. He said, but on a personal level, of course, I completely disagree with that. And he looked at me, and this was a challenge. He said, because my interest is the Irishization of everything. And immediately he kind of got the point. You know, I'm an Irish guy, Gora, white guy, he's an Indian, he's insisting that this is Hinduism, but the fact is, I'm a Hindu. And he was meeting me on the basis that I was a Hindu. So how does the Hindu thought thing work with me? I'm not Indian. I'm not an Indian nationalist. Why would I be? So, you know, and everywhere I go, once I say I'm Irish, people say Sister Nivedita, the Irish Indian nun from the last century or the 19th century. And they make that connection. But again, does Hindutva include her or exclude her? And these are the discussions that have to be had. So how do you, it's like a discussion we had in Belfast years ago. So the peace process in Northern Ireland, it started in semi-detached houses in Belfast. There was a Catholic priest and a monk actually, and a vicar got together and said, look, someone has to start talking. It was actually illegal to speak to the IRA, or to Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA. So under Margaret Thatcher, you couldn't talk to these people. So I was the chairman of the Interfaith Forum in Northern Ireland, a very strange organisation in such a place. But myself and a colleague got invited to come to a house, a semi-detached house. We didn't exactly know what we were going to. We were just invited by this monk, so we took him seriously. He had come to some of our meetings. And he invited us to a house. We had to go around the back at 11:25 in the morning exactly. We walked into a room with the curtains drawn, and we're sitting there with people that we recognized as paramilitaries. These were IRA men. And we were there to discuss democracy in Northern Ireland. This was actually an illegal meeting. So we had a discussion, and it was a very interesting discussion. So one of the IRA guys said, look, in the future, the police force in Northern Ireland has to be 50% Protestant and 50% Catholic, because it was 100% Protestant, more or less. And myself and a colleague looked at each other and looked at him and said, and no percent Hindu, no percent Sikh, no percent Jewish. And of course they immediately got it. And as the conversation went on, it wasn't about Catholics and Protestants, because it became obvious that Catholics and Protestants were actually Christians. It's one religion, not two, when you're with the other religions. So we were talking about what does a democratic Northern Ireland look like? And it's such an interesting discussion to have. And unless we were in the room, we couldn't open up the discussion. So I think the idea of Hindutva in relation to others, in relation to educated discourse, will expand. One of the guys in the room was a paramilitary. He was a divisional commander of the IRA, well known for it. He'd never been arrested for it, but ordered killings and all that kind of stuff. 4 years later, he was a minister in the Northern Ireland government. So things can change radically with discussion. Just intelligent discourse. People meeting people who are sincerely trying to look for alternatives. So I think the idea of Hindutva is a work in progress. The fact that it's in government is an issue, but it's still a work in progress. So I wouldn't give up hope. We're just at the beginning of a thought process. Maybe that's one way of looking at it.
Any more before we wrap up?
Great. Thank you very much. So will I announce these books? Sorry. I have to show these books at some stage. Prefables.
Why didn't you do that first?
Do that first? Okay. We have here, we had a Diwali fundraiser campaign, and Prafulla Rajan, she won the draw, and the prize is all these books. Now, years ago, you will remember Nick Sutton, and we produced the Bhagavad Gita. Remember Nick's Bhagavad Gita? And then the Yoga Sutras. So we've gone in with Mandala Publishing in America, and now we've produced all these introductory books to Hinduism. If you walk into any bookshop, when you see the shelf on Hinduism, it's very small. I mean, surprisingly small. And it's just a very eclectic handful of books that you have no idea are they good or bad or indifferent. So these are just introductory books to Hinduism. They're very attractive, very well. The content is really excellent. Colonial Hinduism, an introduction by Amiya P. Sen. Amiya P. Sen is a Bengali scholar, very well known in India. He's a fellow of our centre. The Bhagavad Gita, that one you know well. Tantric knowledge. We all know about Tantra. Actually, we don't know anything about Tantra generally. This is by Gavin Flood, our academic director. And it's just good to get to know something about Tantra that hasn't got to do with sex, because that has not much to do with Tantra. Did you know that when you go to the temple and they do a puja, that's Tantra? Hope you knew that. And Light on the Mahabharata by Nick Sutton, new book. So again, an introduction to the Gita, the Mahabharata, the idea of Tantra, women in Hinduism, temples, and other things as well that I forget. The Yoga Sutras, an embodied ecology, yoga and the environment. So Prafulla gets all these books, but you can get these books if you go on Amazon and look up this Mandala series. And there's a number of other books coming out as well. So this will be an expanding library. So it's the first time that there's been a kind of a popular library of scholarly books, but for the general audience on Hinduism. So very happy to announce that. But you can't have these because these belong to Prafulla, who couldn't make it here today, but she will end up with them. So big round of applause for Prafulla, who won. Thank you.
Would you like to say anything else?
Nope.
Sure?
Yep.
I'm gonna bribe you.
It's just with the look in your face, I'm not going to say anything.